you so much, everyone. It's been wonderful to see on a weekday, right after the work, if you're working on Sri Lankan hours, to see a participation of more than 6 to 7 amazing individuals. So my name is Irshad, as Imali mentioned. I'm the head of talent acquisition for Digital team. Today, I'm going to cover a very interesting topic, a very relevant topic in the market, and I'm sure this is relevant to everyone out there who's on the job hunt, who's looking out for a career change. Also, someone who's starting the new year with a new career opportunity, anything. So CV is the key. CV works as your passport that opens many doors out there. So I think that's the important part where we need to get our CVs correct. So in the next 1 hour of time, I'm going to take you through all what I have learned and what I know and what I recommend to all of you. So there's no right or wrong answers, by the way. All these things, all the points that I'm going to talk about with you is about based on my personal experience, also the industry standards across, as well as these are being considered as the best practices out there. So before further ado, let me start off the session by sharing my presentation for the day. Hope you all can see. Yes?
Yes, Irshad, it's visible.
Right. So first and foremost, let me tell you what a CV is generally considered, right? So your CV is your first handshake, right? So this is where you start the interaction out there with any company or any place that you're gonna apply or start your the career journey. So it's the chance to showcase what you can do, not only what you have just done, right? It shows that your potential, what you are capable of doing, and also a strong CV gets you noticed, keep you ahead of the rest of the candidates, and also open door for interviews. That's the most important things because most of the candidates out there complain, no matter how many roles I apply, I never get a call for an interview, right? That's the common, the problem out there. And also, it turns opportunities into offers, right? So, a job out there is an opportunity, but how you are going to turn that opportunity into an offer is the key preliminary factor is about your CV. So, that's why I say always your CV is your first handshake. So, how you should know how to give a firm handshake with a good grip, and that is where we are going to talk about today about your CV, right? And also they say a CV is not a biography. It's not about everything that you have done. Think about it as a marketing document. The job of a CV is to explain about you and sell you to a potential customer who's going to hire you. So it's not about biography. So we see in biographies we mention everything a person has done, said, have gone through. So we are not going to write a biography, but we are going to we are going to create, we are going to do a marketing document. So think in that aspect. And let's get into the first and foremost, the very interesting fact about CV is that most often you don't know how a recruiter reads a CV. So let's touch upon that part first, understanding about how recruiters read resumes, right? So you might see out there, so the moment you apply for a role, the moment you've been contacted by a recruiter, or the moment you reached out by a talent acquisition professional for a role, the first and foremost thing is about they will request for your CV. Or else if you are applying outside, the first thing that you do is that you're going to send the resume, your CV out to them. But that's the end of the process. You might not know exactly how the recruiters, how the HR team or the specialized talent acquisition professional read your CV. So let me tell you how this exactly happens. Right? Okay. So there are 3 stages. We also see how the recruitment during the screening stage, how's your resume has been, right? So there are three stages. But the first stage is about skimming. So the recruiter initially skim through your CV. It might not take more than 2 to 3 seconds. Just look at your overall structure of the CV and how it's been structured accordingly. And we just skim through. So you have to make sure your CV is being designed in order for a recruitment professional or a talent acquisition professional to effectively skim through. So I'll talk about the skimming part in a very interesting slide. And the second stage is about once a recruiter or a talent professional started to skim through your CV, the next thing about scanning, right? The second is stand for scanning, and they scan through the CV for the keywords, whether the role you have applied for is correct, and then make sure job description, there are certain keywords. Say, for an example, if it's for a creative designer role, almost everywhere out there we see Adobe is used as the most, used creative tool, Figma. And then we see associated other products like Canva. So those are the key words or key tools. So we look for those. So we initially do a quick scan, and if we manage spot any of these keywords out there on your CV, then it goes to the next step, which is study. So you need to make sure your CV is actually skim proof. You need to make sure your CV is able to scan without any hurdles, without any issues. And then if you pass the skim and scan stage of your CV, the CV goes to the next stage, which a recruitment professional or a talent acquisition professional start to study your CV. So this is the study can be, reference in between 1 minute to 10 minutes, depending on the role, depending on your the structure of the CV, and depending on how experienced and how long is your CV. So there are certain other factors that depends on the study, but in generally we see a minimum 1 to 3 minutes of a study time spent on each and every CV, right? So once the skim and scan stage is passed, the study stage comes. This is where we go through your CV in detail, right? This is where we go through your CV and areas, achievements, and the responsibilities, whichever that you have put in terms of as the content of your CV is getting studied by the recruiter, right? And this is where you need to make sure your CV is readable and your CV has a proper structure, and you follow every best practices out there to make sure that you give the recruitment person a pleasant experience when studying the CV, right? So based on that, let me explain how exactly the skim and scan process work. So when it comes to recruitment professional, what they mostly do is actually they read the CV in two patterns. These are the major two user experience pattern I'm gonna talk about in detail in my next slide. But F motion and Z motion is the most used method of any recruiter reading a CV. So if you really look at the F motion, starting from left to right and all the way down, and they from left to right, down, left to right, down, left to right. So that's how the F motion works, right? And then the Z motion, and you go all the way from left to right and skip to the bottom, again left to right and skip to the bottom, again left to right. So these are the two key motions that is commonly used to screen a CV by a recruiter. So this is where the most important point comes in. The first bullet point of each position is crucial for hooking the reader, right? For anyone who's reading your CV, you need to make sure that your first bullet point or the first part of the reading by the recruitment professional has to grab the attention of the recruiter. For example, we might see on the top right of every CV, the first part is about you write a professional summary about yourself, right? We call it executive summary, we call it a professional summary, or we call it about myself, or whichever the way that you have included in your CV. This description plays a crucial part in creating a noticeable CV, as well as I mentioned, hooking the reader, hooking the talent professional up with your CV. So I've seen many mistakes out there where this particular paragraph is actually used with dynamic words like results driven professional, dynamic professional, experienced professional. It's very generic out there. We see in the most CVs. I'm not saying it's wrong, but then again, we should know that this is a marketing document. This particular document work as a passport for you to go inside the airport, say for an example, right? So this is where you need to make sure that you use correct words, correct keywords in order to grab the attention. So I might have screened on a daily basis for about 10 to 15 or more than around 60 to 70 CVs based on the number of roles a recruiter handles. So they actually know the moment the first and the second word, how it's been structured. They actually got to know, okay, this is where this description is going to head, whether it is something that is actually give value to me after reading this or not. So this is why we say the first few words and the bullet points are very crucial in order to pass the skim and scan phase from a recruiter when they screen a resume, right? And these are the motions. So always make sure, as a best practice, I would recommend to left align all the text on your CV, because F motion and Z motion are the most used motion when reading the CV. So when you're making it left align, it gives you the reader a proper experience. So the motion and the alignment matters to pass the skim and scan. At the same time, the bullet point of each position, the words, how you articulate all your summary and description and words are very key. Now, we are in a AI-driven era, and you don't have to write all these by your own self. You have to feed only what you think and get the proper words, and then fine-tuning with your experience, how it describes the most suitable, you can replace with it. We still see these mistakes are happening. So, and first and foremost, a good CV should able to bypass, skim, and scan 100% properly. So that's the very first tip I want to give you this evening. And this is actually from an interesting study done by Nielsen Norman Group. I'm not sure you have heard about them. So the NN Group in US is one of the leading consultancy group that actually studies user experience in web and user design sort of trainings that they provide. So one of the studies that they actually did, you can see the heat map, and in the color, the red color is actually defines the most looked area in a web page. For example, you send your CV, apply for a role, means the recruiter actually reads it through a laptop or a computer. So that actually works as a web application or a web page. Say, for example, right? So if you could see, you can see the F pattern easily in the first, second, and the third image, right? They start reading from the left side, which shows in red is the most looked areas. And the yellow and the blue indicates fewer waves. So this is why I say the F pattern, we need to beat the F pattern. We need to optimize our CV in order to bypass the skim and scan phase, right? So this clearly shows, scientifically proven, that the F and Z motion works, and that's how the recruiters also scan your CV in order to make your CV stand out in terms of bypassing the scan and skim phase, right? For example, so I'm going to give you a couple of tips how to pass the skim and scan stage from a recruiter's perspective. For example, using heading and lists that actually, rather than using paragraphs, you can use proper headings and list that actually grabs the attention. Rather using general dynamic words, we can research what words actually gives the better understanding about you. So that actually should be tailored according to the job role that you apply. So one of the most common mistakes out there that everybody does as a candidate is that they create one good CV, and using the CV, they apply for 1,000 jobs. So one of the golden rule in recruitment in candidate journey is that one CV does not fit for every role out there. So if you're applying for a role number one with different expectations than the role number two, you need to make sure that you tailor your CV accordingly. It's not about always who applies fast. It is also about tailoring your CV and then applying with the correct purpose. So use proper heading and list is one of the famous tips to pass the skim and scan stage. And highlights key data. Use appropriate bold lines when you mention your achievements, your titles, to make them pop. And those bold points are definitely grabs the attention of a recruiter. And be specific. I always mention, replace generic responsibilities with concrete achievement and keywords. About achievement and keywords, I have a separate slide, so I'll go through in detail. And always try to put everything what you mention on your CV with an impact. Don't just mention for the sake of mentioning, but reword it as in a way that you have created a positive impact in your previous role and also about yourself. So these are the couple of tips I can talk about in general. And let's talk about very few points that, since we have a very limited number of time, limited the time frame, I'm going to talk about the most important points that you should make sure to get your CV noticed. So I might miss certain, generic points. Those are still valid, but please be understand. These are the points that I would like to bring in front of you to make your CV a proper one, right? All right. So let me start off with the context and competence. So the resume should be easily scannable, right? For similarities in company type, tools used, and industry in context. So when you're trying to create a CV and when you're trying to apply for a role, make sure your CV is actually matching the context of the job description or the job advert. So the most common mistakes we see, as I said, these CVs are not getting tailored for each and every job description a candidate apply. So make sure your CV's content is actually matching with the context of the job description or the role you apply for. That is very key. Don't use inappropriate words or lengthy description about what you have done. Limit them accordingly to and each and every role that you have played. Maybe you can list down the 10 most impactful outcome that you delivered in your previous role, and again summarize those 10 points into key 4 to 6 points to mention on the CV outlining your responsibility. So make sure your CVs should reflect the type of the tools that you have used should be similar, and the industry, if you have worked in a similar industry, make those use word and make your CV's content relevant to the context of the job description. So that is very key. That is what we call the context in terms of when you create a CV. The second and the most important part is about the competence. Make sure you list down the specific abilities that actually matches with you, what you have done versus what the role is demanding for. If something that you have done is not required by the role, you don't have to mention. If it adds actually an impact on the overall scope of the role, make sure to add. So not you don't have to list every competence. You might be a competent candidate, but make sure the competence that you're going to mention on the CV should be directly in line with what the job is asking for. So always remember context and competence is definitely key for creating a CV that gets you noticed. Right. So I was talking about the responsibilities and versus achievements, right? I've seen in general very common practice out there is that most of the candidates, they blindly mention the responsibilities that they have done. Sometimes these responsibilities are for the factor of easy to identify the responsibilities. They straight away copy and paste it from their job description, right? So this is a very common mistake I see with many candidates I read. When reading their responsibility, it looks like I'm reading another job advert, sometimes another JD in general. So avoid this mistake. Responsibilities generally tell me what your job description said, what you've been asked to do is what responsibilities are generally considered of, right? Instead of listing all your responsibilities, what I would suggest is to include the achievements. Achievements is actually tells what you have delivered in your previous or in your current role. So figure out when you're mentioning the responsibilities, translate all those responsibilities into achievements that you have done. Instead of listing all the responsibilities, I want to introduce a formula. First, mention the results that you have gained from those responsibilities. And if you have any metrics, I'll talk about the metrics in detail in my next slide. Any metrics, make sure that you put those metrics in place. And also make sure whatever that you're going to mention under the achievements or the responsibilities section, make sure it matches the context of your impact that you have made. So rather mentioning the responsibilities, what I would suggest to create a good CV, always include your achievements, the impact, the true impact that you made in your current or your previous role, and that shows the outcome, what sort of expectations, what achievements, how competent candidate you are. Those are some of the points. So don't just mention responsibilities, but translate them into achievements you have achieved personally. So that gives a bit of a strong weight on the CVs. Right. So I was talking about the responsibility. For an example, think about you as an automation engineer. Think about you as a support engineer, a level 2 engineer, network engineer, right? And one of the tasks that you might have mentioned on your CV, imagine responsible for automation tasks, right? Because one of the JD says you are responsible for automation tasks in your current or your previous role. So just without mentioning blindly what you have achieved and mentioning just responsible for automation tasks, which I see in most of the CVs I go through every day, rather be it very achievement specific. Imagine you have done in one project, you have done a Power Automate workflow that made for an internal automation work, then that could have been reduce the time spent on those manual tasks. Say, for example, responsible for automation tasks versus design and deployed Power Automate workflows, reducing manual approvals by 40%. So that gives you are able to deliver automation tasks successfully. Say, for example, you might be working on a working as a level 2 engineer or level 3 support engineer, right? And on an average, you might be closing around 20 tickets, 30 tickets, or if you take an average for a month, you might be closing 100 tickets, 150 tickets in average. So rather just mentioning under the CV, I am responsible for handling, managing requests coming through to the ticketing platform. Rather, you can be very specific and say, I am responsible for, I have achieved 100% rate in terms of closing tickets successfully, 90%, 60%, whichever the number. So that's why I mentioned results, metric, and context. So always mention your in your CV, in the responsibilities or what you have done in your previous role under results, what results you have achieved, and what metric. If you can come up with a quantifying metric, come up with like 40%, 60%, I have closed this number of tasks. If you are a graphic designer, I have average, I am creating around 15 to 30 web posters or maybe social media designs. So that shows the recruiter, just like myself, okay, the person has the right thing. The person has delivered for more than 30, 20, posters on an average basis. That shows how capable you are. So that is where I wanted to say, always minimize to mention what exactly mentioned on your JD, rather make it impactful, achievement driven outcome on your CV. So that's the one of the most important thing. And the second part I wanted to mention is about the golden rule of relevance. So if you take most of the CVs I go through on a daily basis, for the sake of getting the job, for the sake of getting shortlisted in the role, candidates are they tend to mention every technical term, tools that they have never exposed but might have heard in a meeting in their current role, they listed in their resume. So that actually doesn't give the credibility about yourself. It actually wastes the time of the recruiter and yourself as well, if that is something key expectation of the role. So make sure that you are putting only relevant information to the specific job. If that job is asking about certain scope level requirements, be specific. Rather, just mentioning everything you know of, that will only give you a wrong impression to the recruiter, but rather mentioning everything you know, make sure you mention what is right and what is relevant for you and what is relevant for the job as well. So that is why we say only include information that is 100% relevant to the specific job. And that's why we say one CV doesn't, open doors for every job. You have to tailor your CV for each and every job you are applying for. Right. So we spoke about this one, but I want to touch upon in different contexts. So numbers create trust. Even approximate numbers are better than none. So this helps recruiters to visualize your impact. And if you can quantify something like improved response time by 34%, improve the delivery of the services by this percentage, or maybe at least completing 2 to 3 projects maybe on a monthly basis, that even shows the quantifying output that you can deliver. So we already spoke about this. Always remember, if you can bring numbers to your CV, if you can bring achievement to your CV, if you can bring impact onto your CV, that gives the credibility and that gives the recruiter's mindset that you are a capable candidate for the role that you have applied for. Right. Here's the key expectation that, the keywords is being discussed among every recruiter you might see in every CV building session. In everyone is actually going to, make one point that is about make your CV ATS friendly. But I'm completely against that. Make the CV ATS plus human friendly, because ATS only puts, I'll talk about the ATS in detail, like application tracking system. So if you really look back like around 5, 6 years back, or maybe even before that, every company might have asked you to send your CV to an email, right? But if you really look at now, you don't have to apply, or you don't have to send your CV, but you have to apply through a portal, right? You have to upload the CV and it comes to a system called application tracking system. So I'm going to talk about a few recent trends, right? So the application tracking system we use actually introduced a new feature called how do you say that? The feature is actually called a relevant match to the CV, the talent match. So it is actually an AI-driven feature that reads through the CV and it reads through the job description and that matches the keywords. If you are looking for example, if you look for someone with great M365, automation, PowerShell, Bash, all these keywords, and if you have mentioned those keywords in your CV, those keywords are being tracked automatically, actually ranks into the ATS system automatically. So this is why I mentioned, rather being very broad and specific about mentioning about your responsibilities, your impact, always make sure you use correct keywords. Now a question will come. Okay, so I have my CV. I'm going to apply for this level 3 support engineer role. How I'm going to identify specific keywords that actually, valid for this particular role. So how I'm going to do that, right? So the easiest way to find keywords is actually reading through the job description properly. If the role has been asking about automation tools, if the role is asking about ITSM, IT service management tools, if the role is asking for about specific certification like ITIL, or maybe Microsoft certifications like cloud, AI, M365, or if you are into designing marketing, right? If you have any HubSpot related certification, if you have any Google Garage related certifications. So those are the keywords that you can find in the job description, right? Number of years of experience in M365, Admin Center, Active Directory, all those technical terms. And if you have exposed and if you have done it in your current or a previous role, when you are mentioning on the CV, you can always include those keywords in the CV in order to bypass the ATS and the human recruiter. So rather just mentioning blindly, I have supported across M365 applications throughout in my previous role. You can include those keywords and specific about what M365 tools, what specific terms. Is it Active Directory? If you're coming from a marketing, have you done performance marketing? Have you done SEO, keyword research, Ahrefs? Those are certain, digital marketing keywords that you can find in the job description. And if you have exposed and done it, make sure you mention them in your CV accordingly. So these keywords play a key role when a recruiter runs through your CV. Also an ATS, if a company that you're applying for using an application tracking system, those application tracking system picks those keywords and rank your CV as a preferred candidate. Now, for example, if a digital team, if you are applying for a role and say, for example, those keywords are 100% matched in your CV will automatically rank as a preferred candidate using the talent match feature. So I'm sure most of the organizations out there, more than 70% of the organization in Sri Lanka are now using an ATS, and you are sending your CV through the ATS itself. And these ATSs are coming more advanced day by day with AI and all those automation features. And these ATS ranks your CV accordingly. So make sure you mention those specific keywords on your CV in order to bypass the ATS and the human scanning. So make sure you read through the job description properly and then tailor your CV accordingly in order to get through the human and ATS verification. And that will definitely open for an interview call, right? So keywords are key, remember. So with that, I'm moving to an interesting factor. This is about your profile picture, right? Or this is about your CV. If you're mentioning your photo of your CV, make sure you have a nice, professional headset. I have seen candidates, have put selfies. They put probably went on a nice theme park. Might have gone for a somewhere out, and they have taken a selfie and they have put it under there. So if you think this is very subjective matter, because sometimes you might ask a profile, a bio or a photo is required. So it's completely up to you to decide. Some companies, they want, those profile photo in your CV if they are working on different other platforms to identify the candidates more easily, right? So make it a nice, professional, clear headshot, like a proper headshot of your photo from your head to the chest range. So make sure keep it very professional in a solid background. The reason I wanted to put is that your profile headline, the description, the job description, sorry, job history, your achievements, everything is actually text based, text on your CV, but the visual component of your CV is the headshot of you. So having a proper headshot psychologically puts a recruiter into a proper first impression about your CV. So if you are deciding to include a photo of yourself on the CV, if you prefer, make sure to make it professional. Otherwise, if any of the role demands for a professional headshot, make sure to keep it professional. It doesn't have to be, you have to go to a proper DSLR camera and to take it. The mobile phones cameras are very advancing. You can stand in a white, proper, solid background, take it, and maybe do a bit of a edit on your phone, crop it nicely, and place it professionally on your CV. So as I said, your profile picture, your bio, your headshot picture is definitely add value to your CV based on your personal preferences. Right. So with that, I'm going to move to the next and most important point. Few mistakes, but I'll come to that point bit later. I'm going to talk about few general mistakes that we generally see in the CV. So I'm not going to explain all these things in detail, but I'm going to talk about these things and why it matters. Right. For an example, we see certain candidates, they come up with certain CVs with skill bars, right? For an example, if you can be able to speak multiple languages, right? You might be fluent in English, Sinhala, Tamil, or if you're exceptionally good, you might be speaking Hindi and a few other languages. And we see candidates, what they do is that they use, progress bars. They use like, a bar to mention on the CVs. And these are graphical, components that you mention on the CV. And this actually disturbs ATS to scan your CV and pass those information down properly. For an example, you might be including as a skill, I'm skilled in cloud, and you want to rate it from 0 to 10 with a bar. And you might have, 10 to 15 skills, or maybe even 5 to 10 skills mentioned on the CV. You always, what you do is you might add those graphical element on the CV. So ATS actually scan these information, and it will automatically create an ATS profile in the ATS system. For example, if we talk about the ATS system that we use, every candidate, when they apply, it creates a profile automatically, right? And it creates an AI summary, and it creates a job fit recommendation for every role that you applied. right? And it takes certain keywords from your CV, right? And these passing all this information into proper ATS profile, and having those skill bars and charts and certain logos that you might tend to use. I have seen candidates using certain technical skills when they mention like logos. For example, if you are expert in cloud, you might put nice AWS logo. You might put Azure Microsoft Cloud logo there, and that actually disturbs ATS to read your CV properly. So this might lead to not capturing the proper informations correctly. For example, if you are mentioned on your mobile number, email, your LinkedIn profile, when it comes to ATS, all those information is actually captured properly into relevant ATS fields. So to avoid misleading those information properly, to represent yourself on the ATS profiles, we don't recommend to use certain graphics, right? And you might have sort of a, question. Okay, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a UI designer, so I need to showcase my portfolio in the CV. Or I might need to add a couple of certifications or certificate I have done in my CV. So how I'm gonna do that, right? So if you have coming from that sort of a background, don't use them on your CV, but instead you can add a portfolio link, right? So there are famous portfolio links out there, sites out there where you can upload your portfolio, and you can always mention those links. So ATS is actually taking those informations automatically, makes the recruiter's life more easy. Imagine I want to find your LinkedIn. I don't have to go through your CV again and again to find the link. The ATS itself capture those information on time, and it captures all those information perfectly. And these skill bars and charts and the profile, this actually affects them. So make sure you don't overload your proper overload with those graphical elements on your CV, right? And we spoke about including irrelevant information. So make sure you use only proper relevant information that matters to you and the CV mostly, right? And we see when it comes to certain project level, explaining certain projects and explaining certain responsibilities, we have seen very generic stuff like dynamic results driven professional, which automatically LinkedIn generates when you're creating a profile. So your bio, your summary actually speaks about you. So don't waste that space on your CV by copying a very generic um, summary from internet. Rather take your time and create a proper summary about yourself. When a recruiter reads the proper bio about you, it should articulate yourself, it should show yourself. So that is also working as a key impact about your CV. So when you're creating a small, including a small introducing about yourself, make sure not to use those dynamic and research driven, because every recruiter out there is pretty much this is not something the person has actually written, but taken out from internet. So if it does not give any value to me to read about your profile bio, definitely I'm not going to read that. So that is why you need to make sure that actually represent about you on the CV. Right. So this is a very common mistake I have seen, right? Every CV should have proper spelling, grammar, and formatting inconsistencies, right? We have seen certain CVs were edited using Photoshop, exported as JPEG images, and then they put it into a proper Word document, export as PDF. So when you click on the CV, the PDF, it's actually the word and all those information mentioned on the CV is not readable, right? We can't select them. So when it comes to JPEG focused CVs, the ATS actually confuse itself out, and those information might not be properly captured. So avoid using JPEGs as your CV. So make sure that you use a proper Word version, and always limit your size of your PDF file. That's very important. For example, you might be created these, including high quality text or using other softwares. When you export into a PDF, always check whether your PDF, your file does not exceed more than 2 to 3 megabyte MBs. Right? I have seen certain CVs coming like 10, 15 MBs where considering the Sri Lankan internet, sometimes, these peak hours, those CV might not properly load, so might take some time to load as well. And if you're still emailing those CVs to them, sometimes you might have to wait to make sure these attachments have been sent. It might leave in the outbox as well. So make sure to compress it properly, not exceed more than 2 MB is the standard. There's no set standard, but my suggestion is to not to exceed more than 2 to 3 MB of the file size. Keep it short, keep it compressed, yet clear, and that will definitely able to scan your CV properly into ATS systems. At the same time, spelling mistakes. Imagine that you're applying for a copywriter role. Imagine that you're applying for a marketing role. Imagine that you are applying for a leadership role. And if your CV has grammar inconsistencies, your CV has spelling mistakes that actually represent you as a person who might not go into detail, right? Or a candidate. I mean, like these are certain biases, but then again, end of the day, ATS is a system, and then recruiter who's going to review your CV is a human too, right? So it's common to have them, but make sure these spelling mistakes and everything is in line, and consistent formatting that will definitely give a proper weight to your CV and definitely open certain, roles into the next level. Right. The other thing is about listing too many tools, skills without depth or relevance. So one of the common things I see is that, say for an example, a recruiter is working on a very niche role, right? And say for an example, it's about a new technology. It's not out there in the market, right? Very new role to the Sri Lankan industry, but we could see that you have mentioned that particular word on your CV, right? So if that happens, what will happen is the ATS picks those words and give the recruiter, this candidate has listed that particular skill, and then we might assume that you might have worked on those specific technology or the skill. But when we actually try to call you and ask about if you know about the skill, you might have heard that in a webinar, or you have done a little bit of a couple of research about it, and that's not much into that you have hands on to. So those skills, when you are including anything, make sure that you're mindful about what you do, right? What you mention on your CV. So those are the some of the common mistakes. And there are some other common mistakes I have seen is that always when you apply for a role, give a proper proofread about your CV, about your contact information, about your email, right? Because sometimes when you mention your email as a hyperlink, certain um word or sorry, certain letter might have gone missed. So that might lead the recruiters are unable to reach you out. I have experienced certain good candidates missed or added one more number, which makes us impossible to reach them out to them to understand what's their best way to contact them. So do a proper proofread when you're creating your CV, or else if you are redoing your CV for every role, do a recheck as well, right? So that's one of the bonus points. And most importantly, you can also, when you're listing out, when you're formatting your CV, I have seen many candidates still mentioning their academic results like ordinary level, advanced level examination results. So those are not actually required if you are a working professional. So when you hit to a certain age of being a working professional, those results and sometimes under the achievements, you might have mentioned that I have gone to a zonal level of carom championship, or maybe those irrelevant achievements are not very, very relevant if you're applying for a senior role, unless you are coming from an entry level. For example, if you are a fresher applying for a fresh role, those are the only qualification you might have, then it's completely okay to mention. But if you are a professional, working professional, make sure to include the leadership, sorry, make sure to include the certifications, the technical certifications you have passed, or maybe if you are following certain technical certifications, you can mention as you're following right now. So those are the additional pointers that gives the recruiter that you're going above and beyond in order to upskill consistently. None of the organization wants a candidate who's always thinking about being stagnant into their current role, and they've been in the same role and over without any upskilling opportunities. That shows you are a person with very stagnant mindset. So as professionals, we keep on expanding our knowledge horizons. We keep on doing external researches. We keep on publishing new articles, new researches, or you might be doing new certifications. So include them. Those really matters. Some of the roles that we have personally advertised, we have mentioned certain preferred qualifications like having AZ 900 or certain certification codes like CCNA, CCNP, Palo Alto, and then NSC. When it comes to Palo Alto and Fortinet, there are certain technical certifications, certain codes are there, NSC 1, 2, 3, up to NSC 8. Those certifications are really required to mention on the CV. I have only 5 minutes left, but I utilize the full 1 hour. I'll give another 10 to 15 minutes to open up the floor for any questions you may have. But those are some of the critical points you have to mention on the CV, right? So, and apart from that, you need to make sure that your CV actually gives a proper contrast. Now, I have seen very clean CVs, but with high contrast. Sometimes you might have been using a very light background of the CV, and you're going to make the font color also, into a light color font. So those does not properly outline your CV. If I'm weaving, say for example, your recruiter might be having certain accessibility issues, or maybe when reading those pointers shows how well structured, how high contrast your CV is as well. So avoid fancy backgrounds and so on with underlines and all those fancy backgrounds, and make sure you put out a nicely. Nobody will judge you if you have a nice CV. Yes, this candidate has a very nice and a beautiful CV. I'm going to hire you. That's not happen in the corporate world. Your CV is being shortlisted and hired only for the relevant information you put and the structure. And again, most importantly, how well you have articulated yourself properly to the job description. So make sure you avoid these mistakes in general. And in general, to summarize what I have mentioned as the points, make sure that your CV has the correct context and competency. Make sure your CV has proper keywords. And we discussed how these keywords can be found. Is that the target job advert you are applying? Research your job description versus your CV, the proper keywords mentioned on the job description or the advert is properly mentioned. If those are relevant to myself, I have to make sure those are mentioned on my CV. And finally, we spoke about a couple of pointers around your headshot. Make sure your headshot is definitely key for your CV. At the Also, as the final outcome, make sure your CV has the preferred qualification and the requirements, and filtered out the proper keywords and mentioned properly on the CV as well. So these are the common few things within a very short time frame I could discuss, but there are so many other things we can definitely discuss when it comes to creating a proper CV. But with the time limitations, we are bound to limit the most important points. But you are open to connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you want to review your CV, depending on how the time matters, I'm open to do that as well. And make sure you tailor your CV according to the job description, and that will open your CV to be shortlisted for the role that you're applying for. So that's a bit of the things I wanted to discuss in detail with you, how to get your CV noticed by the recruiters. So I'm opening up the floor for any questions.
Irshad, we have few questions on the chat and the Q&A.
Let me check
So,
them out.
yeah, is it okay not to include a picture in the CV? That was the first one someone asked. Dilini,
Yes, so
Dilini asked.
right. Dilli, I mentioned it's a very subjective topic, right? So some experts say you've been hired for your role, your competency, not for the your profile picture, and some talk about the biasness factor there. So it's very subjective. If you think, now, for example, roles like front office, those things matters about your personality factor. And if some of the roles being specifically asked, mention it's good to have your headshot on the profile. It doesn't have to be very fancy, just your photo with a clear background, and that's enough. But completely okay to avoid mentioning a profile picture on the CV. So it's subjective. But just in case if you're putting your headshot on the CV, make it professional because we don't want the profile pic has to be the reason for the rejections in terms of the biasness. So that is completely open to you to choose it wisely.
We have a little technical, tech-heavy question next. What if I have created a CV using Adobe Illustrator in a pre-built template and saved it as a PDF? Will it confuse ATS? If so, is it advisable to create the CV using MS Word and save it as a PDF in order for it to become ATS friendly?
All right, that's a very good question, Nimal. So, if you are using Adobe Illustrator, that is completely fine, and you have to export the file as a PDF without affecting the readability of the text. For example, the common mistake I mentioned was a candidate has actually created the CV using Illustrator or Photoshop, exported as JPEG or a PNG, and then they have exported the photo into a MS Word and then created the PDF. So it's actually going around the corner, around the bush there. If you're using Illustrator, if you're using Photoshop, make sure to research how to export it as a PDF and make sure the word, the read and everything is you can select from the cursor itself and highlight, and that shows that your CV is properly readable through ATS. So
Thanks
that
for that, Irshad. Um, Another question from Hashika. If I use similar tools but not exact what's mentioned in the JD, how to position that?
Right. So for an example, if the job description has asked for certain specific tools, for example, might have asked for let's say Adobe Photoshop. Taking an easy example, right? And you have used CorelDRAW, or maybe you have used Illustrator, or else similar yet similar tools, but yet different vendors or different expectations. End of the day, all these tools are graphical tools. All these tools are, for example, if the role has been asked for specific firewall of about Cisco fire, or sorry, Fortinet, and then if you have done different other firewall related experience, mention that you have used similar yet different tools properly in your CV. Right now, for example, end of the day, firewalls are firewalls, clouds are cloud technologies, but the vendors could be Azure or AWS. They might share similar configuration techniques, and you might be able to use them with a very short learning curve. If yes, you can still mention, I have used similar cloud platforms like AWS, and you can always talk about different other technologies like similar technologies. End of the day, if you have not used this particular tool, might not be the deciding factor for you to get rejected when you applied for a role. But make sure if you have not done that, to mention different other yet similar tools that you have used. So that shows, even though you don't have that particular experience, similar yet different experiences there for you.
Another question from Chama. What if a job seeker already applied for a job with improper CV? then apply again with ATS optimized human friendly CV. Would it consider the fresh ATS profile, or is there any chance to getting the new CV again based on the previous application data?
Right. Very valid question. So there are certain ATS configurations, Chamat. For example, some ATS actually blocks repeating applications. For example, you have applied today and you can't apply for another 2 to 3 months because your application is already stored in the ATS, right? So if that happens, your question will become very tricky. But sometimes, say for example, there are similar roles and then you apply a fresh for a different role, then you might be uh, able to change your CV properly. What ATS does is to every ATS profile is actually human reviewed. We don't recommend to send a different version of it, but make sure you need to get that correct in order to apply properly. And based on certain ATS integration settings, this can be again tricky. But I encourage, if that's the case, you can reach out to the recruiter from LinkedIn and start to reach out to them directly and sharing your CV. That's one method I could think of. If not, you might have to correct your CV and apply fresh. So that's the most practical answer I could give for this question.
Thanks, Irshad. And Adib has a question. How important is a service letter if you're starting out and applying for a second job?
Right. I mean, service letter and all those documents become very relevant at the point of the onboarding, right? So CV, actually, we are the topic here about, how to pass through the job ATS and human review. So, documentation process, it not being disclosed at the point of when you're applying for the role. So that might come as a requirement when during the onboarding or the documentation stage. So some companies require service letters to verify your services or to check your continuous of the service. Some companies doesn't require, they hire you for your skill, certain cases like that. So service letter is very subjective. It might change from organization to organization based on what their policy is. Right. So I think I have a question. I'll take that role from you, Imali. Read out the question. So Sarah is asking, checking how many of these things we tend to overlook. My question is, what are the top 3 elements you should look at and how we can make sure it stands out? So I have only mentioned a couple of points out of everything. So all those points actually matters. The keywords matters. Your CV and how you have formatted is actually matters. And how impactful when it comes to using certain words and everything, those are very matters. Like those are the points that you should focus on, Sarah. And Fahad is asking, having 1 year of internship, mentioning the academic projects in CV valid, using metrics for experience, describing is valid. 100% valid, Fahad. If, as I mentioned, if you are a fresher, your O level, A level, results might matter. Only for professionals, it might go, not matter. But then again, if you are from an internship, make sure to mention how impactful the project that you have involved during your internship. Not just mention, I have worked in this particular project and I have done this and that. Other than that, you can make it more impactful. I have delivered this number of support to the senior during this project to go live. Right, I have been responsible for this particular, component. I've done research and I have expanded my knowledge in this particular area. So write it, your internship project experience, tools, what you have used in a outcome focused, impact focused. That really matters. Sachini, can we put reference on request? Any comments on that? So in your CV, in generally, what I feel is that the reference is not required to mention. A classic example is that you're not mentioning just your referee information, but you are exposing their personal information out as well. You might be putting their name, their email, then their mobile number, and you've been sending across for out there. We might not know, right? So make sure you protect your privacy, the same time your referee's privacy. And references are only required at the point of you being considered for the next steps and the reference stage. I have seen in Sri Lankan context certain roles being asked for references in their recruitment practices. If they've asked, I recommend you to put, but in generally, my recommendation to organization is that request for references only when it matters. So I
Then the
pass
next
similar
question from
questions.
Pibushan. Are there
So
any websites to create ATS-friendly CVs?
so there are sites out there, ATS friendly CVs, Piyushan, just a bit of a little research required. You can find a CV which matters all those things what we discussed, and you can find it easily.
I think Harita. So will templates from sites such as Canva be an issue and confuse the ATS?
Right. So again, you can still create CVs using Canva and make sure when you're exporting it, not export as a JPEG and then turning into a PDF. Export as a PDF and double check that the text is actually can be highlighted from your mouse cursor and the text is readable. So that is required there.
And then Ashik's question is, if someone did two internships in a software industry, will that affect CV as negative if they are looking out for a permanent role?
Ashik, again, this is a very subjective matter. If you ask from one company, one recruiter, one organization might see that you have done two internships, so you are overqualified for the role. So you have two different company, two different project exposure that might work as a positive. And some companies with biases might see, okay, two internships, we might only require one internship, so he might be too senior for the role. So it's very subjective. End of the day, recruitment is a very subjective, process, Ashik. So, but in my perspective, if you ask me, I would definitely consider you as a positive because you have done two internships, and I might question you why you have done internship. What's the purpose of it during the interview? But if not, that's a positive sign. That's my personal view about it.
The next question from Sajid. Thank you very much for the valuable information, Irshad. I would like to understand why, even after creating a CV that is both ATS friendly and human friendly, I am still not receiving responses. I have over 8 years of experience in UI UX design.
Right.
Oh, looks
So
like
that's a
someone who
very
has
valid.
applied for us. Yeah.
Yeah, Sajid, it's a very valid question. So this is the question I've been asked. I have been applying for so many times why I'm not getting shortlisted, right? If I give you a proper example, Sajid, just like you being very experienced in the UI UX design perspective, there can be similar yet 10, 15 more candidates being shortlisted as well, right? And when it comes to a specific role, again your industry matters. Now for example, there are certain out of the box factors that when it comes to CV is that industry. Say for an example, Sajid, I am hiring a UI UX engineer for one of our projects or a client, and the client is from IT industry. Okay, and Sajid, you are a solid UI UX engineer, and your experience is mostly into e-commerce, right? And I see a candidate with, coming from a very IT business perspective. So definitely the preference will go to that candidate. And your design, again, the design factor is not a quantifiable factor, right? To design, the taste might change. When reviewing your portfolio, your design is more heavy into hard and linear, non-minimalistic design. And I would prefer my expectations around the design could be very minimalistic, using proper UI, UX standards, using proper accessibility standards. So your portfolio works really important part when it comes to getting shortlisted. So that's why I said there are so many so many considerations when it comes to shortlisting. So don't put that blame on the recruiters. There can be 100 CVs coming through, and there might be already a few candidates in the process. So those things can be, considered as pointers. So in general feedback, what I would do is there are certain methods that you can use in order to get your CV passed through to the recruitment team. Sometimes it could be you might know a team member who might working for the company, so you can check with them what the expectations, what role is like. You can ask for a referral. You can reach out directly. Those are some of the points, and you can always reach out to a recruiter and ask for specific feedback. Right. So make sure if you are expert in the UI UX design, it's time for you to take a small time back with what we have discussed today and go through your CV again, and then to refine your portfolio if required. If the role is coming from a advertising background, they prefer an advertising background candidate. So your portfolio, your CV should be focused on the design where you have done for specific agency focused design. And you are working on a very, how would you say, raster graphics. When it comes to UI design stuff, your focus is going to be on web applications. But this particular role requires UI UX design experience into mobile, right? Then tailor your CV to match with the mobile exposure. So if you're applying one CV for every role, that might not matter. So these are some of the points I can gather you to answer that question.
Yeah, and Dasan has a question with regards to references. Is it non-related or references from the current or previous workplace?
References, is it non-related or references from the current or previous workplace? Again, references are very subjective from company to company. It may differ. So ideally, some companies, they don't ask from your current organization if you're still serving for them, because nobody wants to know when you're applying for a company. The company itself knows that you're applying outside. That's not something a general best practice followed in the industry. In generally, referees should be someone who has managed you from a managerial supervisorial level capacity. Then only they can answer questions like how well you adhere to time scope, your certain skills around those questions can be answered if someone is coming from a supervisory or a managerial level exposure. So those are the general best practices when it comes to references.
Another question from Dhananjaya. I think we've answered a similar question before. Is it required to adding person recommendation to a CV? So maybe he's asking about adding a referee to the CV, which I think Irshad answered.
Yeah.
It's not compulsory, but if and when required with your new employer, isn't that the case? At that point,
Yeah.
you can include referrals and recommendation.
Correct. And if you're asking in the form of Dhananjaya, adding someone is recommending you in general, your CV is not actually placed for the recommendation. In my personal view, you can ask the person to recommend you on your LinkedIn profile. So that's the best thing to do if you have a personal recommendation that you should be, and not including in your CV is not generally as considered as the best practice to do so.
Right. And Niveta is asking, will you be able to review my CV if I share it with you?
Right. So Niveda, in generally, it's not something possible to do everyone, but please connect with me on LinkedIn and based on that how time permits, I'm happy to do. But in generally, you don't have to get it referred by a recruiter itself. The recording of the session will be available on YouTube. So follow. I mean, like you can refer to any chat GPT or the AI, or probably there are so many articles out there to make how to make your CV ATS friendly. So I would prefer to follow those guidelines and get an ATS friendly resume and start working on replacing the information. So it's easy as that. You can always do your own research.
Yeah. And another question to you, Irshad. One page CV is good or more than one page is good?
I think Mithu and Shaloni's questions are the last two questions. So I'll touch both together. Mithu Rupan, so what you are asking is actually one page is good or two page is generally considered as good. So there's no right or wrong answer there, right? Sometime you might be having, a 15 to 20 years of experience professional. So if I say one page is always good, you might not fit into those information, those keywords into one general CV. So if you don't have much information to mention, always say, for example, you have only worked for a couple of previous places and your certification, your education, qualification, everything is quite straightforward. Minimize as much as possible information with correct keywords, not to make lengthy descriptions. One of the most common reason why the CVs need 3 more pages is because when you try to add more and more information into your achievements and the responsibilities, right? So that's why I say keep those concise, precise, spot on, include outcome, achievement focused with correct keywords, and limit to 4 to 6 points maximum, and that will summarize your CV properly. So based on how well experienced you are, which role you, which industry you're coming from, deciding 1 page or 2 page is basically can be considered. And the last question for the day is from Shaloni. Hi, even after getting shortlisted, why is the reason is it's still getting rejected? So generally, if your CV is shortlisted, means you're not technically rejected. If your CV is shortlisted, you might be going through a screening call from a recruiter, right? So that's again a key a hurdle to pass through. Even though you pass through your CV, the screening call matters, right? I'll talk about it very briefly. Every recruiter, once they shortlisted the CV, they might call you, for example, hi Shaloni, I'm this and this person from this company. You have applied for this role. I have a quick screening questions to check with you, right? So they might ask about yourself. They might ask about certain pointers, like say, for example, you've been applied for a role where the role's maximum budget limit is 100,000. Say, for example, and you're currently taking home and your expectation probably could be 150,000 or 200,000. So recruiter might think you are over the budget for the role. Or maybe after talking to you, you have applied, they might feel that you're overqualified or you might be underqualified for the role, right? And that's why I mentioned based on the CV, they will ask certain questions, right? So, okay, you have edited the questionnaire. Interview reasons to be rejected. So, interviews are again very subjective, and there are certain uh, pointers misfit with the roles and expectations. And interviewing is a different topic to talk, and there are certain things we will definitely cover in the next session. We can do that. And yeah, that's bit of all the questions. And yes, please
Uh,
let's connect on
Irshad,
LinkedIn. That's for sure.
Irshad, I know we are time pressured, but we have certain questions that's been asked on the Q&A section. I'll quickly go through one. Nagalingam, how should we dress for an online interview when attending from home? And may I ask if there is a maximum age limit in your recruitment process? Those are the two questions from Nagalingam.
Right. So dress for an online interview when attending from home. There are certain other factors also. A proper lighting and your internet has to be stable without interrupting the interview experience overall. And using a proper, if your laptop's mic doesn't support noise cancellation, always use a headset. That is also matters. And when it comes to attire as the final, make sure to be professional. That's all the requirement is. You don't have to wear a tie or unless otherwise it is being specifically mentioned. But at digital team, a professional, a well-suited attire is something that we encourage. So there's no other requirement as per such when attending interviews, but make sure your logistical requirement like mic, audio quality, video quality, background to make sure it's solid or yet use a proper background for interview. Most candidates fail in that. Always make sure that your audio video is something always. And when you are using a headset, don't use the headset when the mic is and when it, at the chest level, that will capture other noises. Make sure use a wired yet a dedicated mic headset that will give out the proper interview experience overall.
And is there a maximum age limit in the process, recruitment process?
Yes, so there's absolutely no age limit in general, but there are other factors that might affect, like, like if the role is on site, if the role requires, so then the age factor might, but in generally at digital team, we don't have an age a factor for a role. We welcome from as long as the person is capable and the person is meeting the expectation of the role. That's pretty much what we really consider.
Thanks, Irshad. Three more questions to answer, and I think we are done after that. So, first one from Silmi. Do you actually concern about any particular format or template? This is regarding the CV.
So we covered this question, Selmi. There's no particular format or template, as long as it's clean, readable, with proper usage of words, no any other tables or big large images placed on your CV. As long as it's a clean, readable enough CV is the a proper format for CV. And there are multiple good ATS friendly resume formats out there. If you research on internet, you can stick to any of those format in general, and those work very well.
And another question from Gopi. I have worked in non-related IT job. Is it okay to mention it in the resume if I'm applying for a technical one?
Right. So, Gopi, technically, if you worked in non-IT related job and if you're applying for a technical role, it matters how recent their roles are. Right. For example, you were working as a marketing manager right now, and then you're applying for a technical role, then you can't really opt or completely put your role out in your CV. Right. But for example, if you're an experienced professional, like 15 to 18 years of experience or 10 years of experience, and you're applying in 2026, the initial job that you done in 2013, where you were banking assistant in a leading bank, does not really add value. Right. So I would recommend to mention the most recent job roles on your CV. And even if you're applying for a technical role, you have to still mention your previous experience. Those might work in favor of you. Say, for example, you're applying for a e-commerce focused organization as a technical person, and you are a marketing manager in an e-commerce platform previously, right? So that actually shows that you have a foundational understanding of how e-commerce businesses perform. So when you're becoming a technical role, a technical person there, recruiters might concern, okay, Gopi is actually coming from an e-commerce background into a technical role. If his technical exposure is good, he might be a consideration for the role. But avoid your early stage of your career. Those roles might not really add value. But if it's around 5, 8 years of experience you carry, and if it's only few roles mentioned, I would suggest to add them, because that shows that you are attached in the industry and you are working professional. Gives a bit of a depth around that.
Last question, Irshad, from Danushka. Is it okay to mention volunteer experience in the CV? Example, non-profit.
Right. So, Danushka, if that question is a very subjective question again, I would prefer if you have been part of any volunteering leadership projects, you can still mention for a leadership or a very focused role if you're applying for a role like that, because apart from technical or the job required exposure, those pointers shows that you are a person who's outgoing and going out of your scope to bring add more value. Volunteering experiences are great because that shows that you're able to work with people from different backgrounds and different expectations differently. So not overload those experience. If it's significant, if it's something you think add value to your role, definitely you can mention it as a pointer, but don't overload your CV with too many not job focus related information. And if you're running out of space, don't include that at all.
All right, Irshad, I think we are at the end of winding up the session. So thank you very much for enlightening us with your expertise and insights. I believe that everyone who attended found this session helpful, and it will help them to optimize their CVs and make their CVs human and ATS friendly. And I wish everyone will be lucky enough to grab their dream opportunity in the near future by doing so. So thanks once again, everyone, for joining us today. And we will be back with you soon with another episode of Digi Connect with an interesting topic in the next couple of months. And the recording of this session will be available in our YouTube channel very soon. And also, if you have signed up for the event, we will be also sharing it via email as well. Thank you once again for joining us in, and have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining the event, and thank you, Imali, for moderating the session.